I'm happy that OpenAI is now at version 5. I think we all waited for several years for that. And pretty big. In a way, it is what I expected. So the capabilities of the model have obviously gone up to the next level. And then they added a few additional tweaks. But it was also not kind of like next level world like that. The moment that GPT-4, for example, had where you were like, oh my God, what is this? It's so much better than everything I've ever seen. I think everybody who has seen the trajectory that the models have been on over the past 2 years was not surprised. Clearly, it's the best model. Clearly, it's really good. I'm sure almost everyone here will be using it. But it is within the realm of what I would have expected.
Yeah, last take. Generally, I'm super excited to have Lars here because we realized that, Langfuse operates in mostly San Francisco and Berlin. In San Francisco, there are many interesting events going on with people who basically are decision makers in the space. But there's some kind of interesting people here in Berlin as well. But many of them are unknown, as for example, Lars, who is mostly visible online, but not in the physical world. So it's nice. Thanks for coming out of your home where you mostly work from to basically share some of your knowledge here. Lars is one of the co-maintainers of the Vercel AI SDK, has previously worked on ModelFusion, exited that project to Vercel, to then now lead the Vercel AI SDK. Maybe we can start there. How did this basically come to be? Why did you start working on ModelFusion? And how then did you exit to Vercel and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can go about 3 years back, right? Even before the ChatGPT moment. So I was working on automatic code transformation and migrations with my own little solopreneur company that I had back then. And in summer 2022, it's there was the first workshops and so forth where people started to talk about foundation models and what GPT-3 can do and so forth. So I got interested in that and was monitoring the space. And then the day I remember is when ChatGPT came out, right? And I didn't sleep the whole night. I was like, okay, this is next level, right? And the next day I went in and I built it into the application I had, a similar thing where you could chat with AI. And I was convinced that there was a lot of potential there. And so I kind of stopped what I was doing at that point and explored different ideas. For example, VS Code plugins for code generation, all the stuff you see nowadays in Cursor, obviously years ago, very early. I dropped that idea. It was called Rubberduck. And then when GPT-4 came out, explored a few other directions, also agents and observability. And I started developing my own little agent library that was around a few months after LangChain became a big hit. And so I wanted to do something different in JavaScript because not everybody was happy with LangChain. And that was kind of the precursor. And I started realizing that a lot of what LangChain was doing is just reinventing the wheel in a way. So reinventing the for loop, reinventing workflows and whatnot. And it almost always got in the way. For the use cases that I had also as a contractor, I wanted something super simple. So I started looking at it. What are the good ideas? What are the bad ideas? And then ModelFusion, the core idea is essentially 3 things. So I want to have something very, very simple that I can use as a function that doesn't get in the way. I can use it. I can focus on my prompts. And then I can just generate or stream text and not worry about it. I want to use models from all kinds of providers, not just OpenAI in an independent way, right? Even locally with Llama CPP and so forth. So I needed to abstract that. And then I didn't want to reinvent the for loop. I didn't want to reinvent a workflow because when I built my little agent framework, I realized that it's just getting in the way. At the end of the day, you just want to write JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever language you want and control exactly what you're doing, right? And taking those 3 ideas together, I started with the first prototypes of ModelFusion and iterated on it and so on, right? And around the same time, Vercel started internally their first version of the AI SDK. So it was started before my time there. But I was monitoring it. And I think a couple of months later, G reached out to me, Guillermo Rauch, the founder of Vercel, and said, hey, do you want to work for us? And I was like, I'm doing my own thing. Started talking to them, and eventually they convinced me to become a contractor. So I was working on the AI SDK. I started sometime in October 2022, while I was also working on my own library. And eventually it was a little bit of a conflict of interest because doing the same thing for 2 libraries is kind of weird. And then we had a little discussion, and at the end they decided to buy ModelFusion and integrate it into the AI SDK. And then in early 2023, I started working for Vercel and integrating ModelFusion into the AI SDK and extending it.
And this was in early 2023.
Let me think. Sorry, 2024.
Yeah, I was like October 2022 would have been pretty early for Vercel to do the AI SDK.
Yeah. So I got the years wrong. So 2022 October was the ChatGPT moment, and then 2023 in May were ModelFusion and AI, and then the next year I joined them. So 2024 in spring.
Nice. Yeah, I still remember seeing like the ModelFusion. I think you did like a ModelFusion demo or some kind of walkthrough, like a meetup, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I downloaded it online on meetups and everywhere I could find. But it's actually kind of funny back then that people were extremely critical of the ideas. It's like, oh, you need to do it my way. This is a bad idea, and here is why. And like every developer was criticizing it. Which is funny looking back, you know.
What I liked back then was that it was TypeScript focused, because like we completely built on TypeScript, but then we see all of these libraries back in these early days purely focusing on Python, and basically needed like a Vercel to basically see out, okay, we need something for the JS TypeScript ecosystem. So this one really nice to see. Maybe going from this moment onwards, basically since you started working full time at Vercel, working on the SDK. Was the initial version of the AI SDK then pretty similar to what you did with ModelFusion, or how did this kind of like merge happen of the two projects?
Yes, originally I followed their approach in the AI SDK, and that they had the approach that you take the SDK from the API provider, so for example, OpenAI SDK or Anthropic SDK and so forth, and then you kind of wrap it and convert it to their standard. And that approach has a lot of pitfalls, as we realized. Like when the API versions change and the library versions change, it just becomes a mess, right? So it gets really, really difficult. And so when I joined Vercel, the first thing I did, and this was the 3.1 release of AI SDK, is to integrate ModelFusion as kind of like the foundation layer, and we put away everything that was old. So all the AI SDK version 2 and version 3.0 things, they got deprecated, and in version 4 we removed it, right? And then once that new foundation was in place, I kept iterating on it in version AI SDK 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, and then 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, right? But there was still this legacy of like how the whole UI integration worked. They had their chat hooks in React and their older protocols, and some of the things were a little bit convoluted. So then this is the big change that I did with AI SDK 5 is also improve that direction and put a new foundation in place there as well for the UI.
And before we get to version 5, so basically looking back, the big one change after you joined was like removing the dependency on the vendor SDKs.
Yeah, it didn't immediately happen, right? We deprecated, we left the old stuff there, and then in version 4, we eventually removed it. But yes, in order to have a really thin foundation, you need to do that. A lot of provider SDKs, they have also this JavaScript dependency hell, right? Where you import like many libraries and they import libraries and they import libraries. And then they don't use the new, like say, native fetch. They use Axios and like you end up with a mess. And at the point where you really control how you call those APIs, because it's not more than an API call, you can make it much more lightweight and thinner.
Yeah, I can relate. We had like so many issues with our JS SDKs when they have these sub-dependencies and then they don't work on Cloudflare Workers or something. So it's really nice to not have that many dependencies in the SDKs. So version 4 was basically like removing these dependencies. Was there something else that basically was a big shift in version 4 before we get to version 5?
Not really. I mean, the philosophy back then is that the major releases is when you can make breaking changes. So before there are always like a few minor breaking changes, but no big breaking changes, no big removals. We left all that for version 4. So version 4 didn't bring any new spectacular features. It was just a removal of old things, which is very different from the development of version 5.
Yeah, what's changed in version 5?
In version 5, we took a very different approach. We branched off. We knew that we needed to change the whole foundation. So the AI SDK works by having a specification that the different providers that we use as adapters essentially to the provider APIs, they standardize on this specification. And this specification kept evolving as the providers came out with new features over 2 years. So in spring this year, it was really messy. Specification was not great at all. which makes both sides harder. It makes AI SDK implementation harder. It makes it harder to write your provider adapters, right? And so a lot of effort went into cleaning this up to now have a specification that's extensible, but also standardized to the features that we see today.
Interesting. What was like the biggest design space there, or what was like the hardest decision to make?
I don't think there was one hard decision. It was just like literally hundreds of small changes that added up to make it a really coherent, clean new specification. And also it wasn't possible to have compatibility with version 1 specification with version 2 specification, which makes like AI SDK 5 a little bit of a more complex update.
Yeah, I already chatted with I think like a couple of people here that they've already made the switch to version 5, because I would just assume, like, how many people use the Vercel AI SDK?
Oh.
Okay, nice. How many are on version 5? Okay, so it's possible to upgrade, like technically.
and we have code migrations and everything, so we went out of our way to make it really easy.
Yeah,
as easy as it could be, given how hard of a change it is.
Nice. Like generally, what's your take on like how, like, I mean, when building SDKs for other developers, it's a lot of like educated by your like worldview on where AI applications are headed over the next, I don't know, months and years. Like, do you have some like core takes on what you're building for, what your core assumptions are, like what to basically build for and what not to build for, like what you like especially exclude because, I don't know, other frameworks might go into this direction, but you feel like this is not a good design take, or there's something that's up for like the application developers to decide. Like, do you have some strong takes there?
I mean, there are interesting, different like cases that one has to distinguish, right? So, for example, with ISDK 5, we made a bet on UI, right? We say the web is mostly like web applications and UI, and there is no other framework that gives you like full type-safe AI applications end to end. And so that's the bet we made, is to focus on that and not on agents, right? Yes, we built in a few like agentic controls and all of that, but that's a decision just we had to make it based on our like on the resources we had, right? So that's one case where it's like one or the other, right? A lot of it is also monitoring what users ask for in like numerous channels, right? It's like the internal Slack, there's GitHub, there is X, and you over time you get a picture of what people want. Then there's what the providers come out with in terms of capabilities. But usually, like one of the lessons I realized is like it's usually a mistake to hop on something as soon as it comes out in the first provider. So we made this mistake with say reasoning. Right? So first DeepSeek came out, and so we added reasoning. And then Anthropic came out, and they had reasoning very differently. And so we kind of like twisted ourselves backwards to get that in. And then OpenAI came out with responses and reasoning, and we couldn't do it. Right? And
How do you do it now? How do you do it now?
Well, now we cleaned up the API specification, right? Now it's very easy. Plus, we have better extensibility mechanisms. So, for example, that's one thing I really like about AI SDK 5 is that you can get the raw streams, you can get the raw responses if you want, right? So you can always like get the full response if you generate and extract whatever information the provider sends, or you can say, hey, I want the raw chunks of the stream, and then you can do whatever you want with that as well. So there are those escape hatches.
Are there some things that you feel like you really want to touch in, I don't know, the next releases that are more like UI driven? Because I feel like this whole like front end stage, bunch of components, I think there have been like quite some interesting demos and quite some interesting also from our customer base that built with AI SDK. Like what's missing there with the current capabilities that you want to build?
So actually we had a great new release today. I'm not sure you've seen it, but we released AI SDK 5 components with Shadcn. So you can just, Shadcn and install your React components specifically for AI applications, right? It's developed by a different team, but it's fully compatible with AI SDK and the structure there. For AI SDK itself, there will be more improvements to the chat, but also like in this release, we revamped chat, but there are other things like use object, for example, that have not been updated yet. So that's also something we want to look at.
Nice. You already touched on the one thing where you feel like you got it wrong because you went there too fast. So the reasoning settings with DeepSeek. Are there like other things that come to mind where because the space is moving quickly, like you put out something, then you're like on the hook of maintaining it, or you need to wait for the next major release. So are there other examples of this?
Yeah, I mean, this happens repeatedly, right? Another example is computer use, where we went in on Anthropic computer use and we made that possible. And then OpenAI computer use, that should be working now. I have to double check, but it had some other things like reasoning signatures, and reasoning was required, and a few other. So we couldn't make it work for months. We needed to wait for AI SDK 5 to have a foundation where we could really make it work.
How do you think about these kinds of shared interface? Because historically there was like the chat message array, which was pretty standardized across model providers, and the completions API of OpenAI, and everyone kind of like semi-standardized on it. Now with the response API, for example, OpenAI, and with the latest releases today, I think you are forced to use the response API if you want to keep the like reasoning tokens in the chat history for context caching. So there are like more and more providers driving to their probably their own APIs back again, and their own ideas of how to do multimodality, computer use. Like what's then like how much can you standardize in the Vercel AI SDK, or will it then basically be like a lagging function of you always wait for like 3 to 6 months whenever all providers came out with their abstraction, then you try to standardize it? Or what's your approach to standardizing interface that's not as standardized as it has been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing problem. With AI SDK 5, we have those extension mechanisms like provider options, provider metadata, where you can pass through things. So to take, for example, the OpenAI responses API, it is now the standard, by the way, that we're using in AI SDK 5 for OpenAI. They send reasoning signatures and related information. And we attach that, or also IDs, and we attach that as OpenAI specific provider metadata, and then convert it and send it back, and it works. However, it creates a challenge when within a single chat, you want to switch between providers, right? Let's say you start your chat with OpenAI GPT-5, and then you're like, oh, but now I want to switch to Gemini. So that can cause problems because Google also signs their reasoning, and they will not accept reasoning from other providers, right? And so so that's one thing that's actually like, because of the encryption, impossible to solve, but users need to be aware of that. And there is really, for this level, there is no workaround. You can only then have a chat for a single provider, or you scrub information, like scrub the reasoning traces or something.
Do you think like the AI SDK will solve for this as well, of like scrubbing this, or is it basically down to the developer to figure this out?
I mean, our philosophy so far has been to give the developer control, right? I think that one of the things that people found frustrating with, say, LangChain is that they did not have control. Things were happening magically. So you get magically something that's great for a demo, but then you have to optimize it, and you can easily get stuck. And so at this point, the philosophy is to give developers the full control to the degree possible, right? And so we may offer helpers, but I would still want the users to, say, opt in or use a function to scrub the history if they so want.
Nice. Maybe, I mean, we're coming towards the end of the kind of like summary of questions that we had based on the questions all of you submitted when signing up. There have been like a couple that touched more on like the observability space as well. I remember our conversations, I think it was like a year or a year and a half back, when the like semantic conventions in Telemetry were still pretty early, and you guys went pretty early in on basically OTel instrumentation. Or what's now your take, like 16, 18 months later?
Yeah, I mean, it's still experimental. One of the things we want to fix in AI SDK 5.1. So there will be a little bit of a revamp with the lessons learned. Ideally, we make the OTel dependency optional. That's one thing people ask for, and have a little bit of extensibility in that area as well. But we also want to make it way easier to integrate, right? Langfuse is one of the great integrations. You mentioned the standards. You want to be much more standard compliant, but then also enable like the observability providers to access information outside the standard, right? And make that as pluggable as possible.
So can we expect some kind of like callback, or just like Vercel AI specific semantics, or do you have like a fixed plan already?
So some of the ideas I have is like standardizing the interface that's being called. And then one of the implementations you could use would be the OTel implementation that like then does everything to send it correctly to OTel. But you could also plug in other implementations, right? And then Langfuse can decide whether they want to say stay on the OTel level or have something more sophisticated.
Maybe an example for this is like the cache token counts for some of the providers. Really difficult to get across the different kind of like Observability integrations because they're not part of the standard, meaning, for example, the Vercel AI SDK would just expose basically total input, total output tokens across all model vendors, which is really cool. But then, for example, if you use tool like Langfuse or other observability providers for cost reporting across use cases, like your cost will be heavily skewed and basically over-reported because you basically fully ignored all context caching, which is a problem. So then thereby basically exposing the raw model response and letting other people hook in to then do something custom to, for example, extract cache token counts is really cool.
Yeah, and this, by the way, has gotten a little bit better with AI SDK 5. So we don't just send input-output tokens. We also send cache tokens, reasoning tokens, total tokens. So we send that all. And there have been some extensions to also send provider-specific metadata into the OTel, which would include some of the more custom token information.
Nice. Very excited about this. Like looking at the current state of the AI SDK, is there something that's been like the most tedious to maintain?
I mean, one of the things that comes up every week, several times every week, is adding a new model ID or something like that. So we try to like now lower the time to model, probably automate it. Really, you don't need to add the model ID because like all the model IDs are strings, you can just enter them. But people still like it for the docs, for the autocomplete and all of that. So I personally like, even if every time it just takes 15 minutes, it happens so often that it's, yeah, quite tedious. And it's not in any way like interesting or relevant.
Yeah, we just had this as well, where basically when we were watching the live stream, I was texting one of my co-founders of like, hey, can you add the new model? And he was, because pricing was available, I thought it might only be available at the end of the stream, but it was like available right at the beginning. We're like, yeah, we shouldn't wait for an hour now. But it still takes like 10 minutes to basically get the prices right. Then like looking at roadmap to finish this up with the basically prepared questions, how do you see the scope expand? Like you already touched on that you don't want to expand too much into the agentic world, probably, or at least not right now. Where do you see like the scope of the Vercel AI SDK go over time?
I mean, for example, like let's take the UI components, right? So there will be adjacent projects, UI components from ChatCN specifically for this. We call them AI elements. They're kind of adjacent. They work well with the AI SDK, but they're a different project that's done independently, which I think is a very good model, by the way, so they can move at their own speeds. Another example for this is Gateway. So Gateway is in beta now. It is an AI gateway that's tightly integrated with the AI SDK. So you can just enter the model ID as a string and then go through the Vercel AI gateway, and it offers additional functionality such as failovers and load balancing and cost tracking and so forth, right? And so those things are going to happen more and more. For the AI SDK itself, I think we have this abstraction layer that there are many smaller things we want to build on. We want to make telemetry better. We also want to make, I may look at prompt engineering a little bit. So that's one thing that I left out so far. So on purpose. So there is no prompt engineering in the AI SDK. But now with things like a few more agentic controls and things related to that, we actually may add some form of templating. Let's see. It's just some ideas I play with. But a lot of it also depends on the demand of the community. So we're constantly monitoring that. And that actually drives most of our roadmap. So it stays fairly flexible and then responds to what people are asking for.
Okay, so I understand basically integrating with the rest of your Vercel developer tooling ecosystem, maybe something regarding like prompt templating, and but other than this, and maybe telemetry, a couple of improvements. Other than this is pretty unclear yet, and you just will see where the market is going.
Exactly, but there are the common themes to look at, right? Like memory and so on and so forth, and we'll have to see what's the most important and most impactful.
Nice. Regarding 5.1 and maybe another major version, Do you already have an idea of what might be next breaking changes that people could look forward to or expect?
I mean, I think this one was the hardest one. I don't expect another release that will be as breaking as AI SDK 5. I think 3.1 and 5 were the big ones because they're fundamentally like getting rid of what was there before. There will be some minor breaking changes as always, but I think those can be mostly handled by automated code mods. So yeah, I don't expect something like AI SDK 5 again, to be honest.
Nice. Is there something you want to share before we open up for questions?
Well, first of all, thanks everyone for coming. So excited to see many AI SDK users here. I'm honored, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Do some people have questions? Just shout and say your name, maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a question for you.
We get this a lot, and we generally want to focus on building great products and not doing a lot of consulting, which makes us in the end then recommend a lot of good content. So langfuse.com/library is basically our reading list that we can recommend. It includes like people and blog posts.
Yeah, so we really didn't really deprecate it as much to say it's not ready. It's moving back to experimental because after it came out, we realized that there are some technical issues with it. It happened before my time, but the goal is to do this again with RSC, but maybe different. So actually, with AI SDK 5, I think we have some of the things in place we need to have in place, but it would take a lot more investigation to see if it's now the time where we can really do something with RSCs. Now, RSCs in a lot of cases, they're aimed at rendering on the server so your initial response gets there faster. So I also feel that their applicability in that aspect for chat applications is a little bit limited because there you want to stream out. However, they have other benefits like keeping the libraries server side and so forth. So yeah, plan is to look at it again, but it's unclear when that's going to happen. Hmm. Mhm. 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 Yeah. So the AI SDK tool calling loop is more for like, I would say, faster agents, where the risk of like the whole thing going down and longer running tasks, the needs are not as relevant. But there is a large use case for what you're saying, and it's something we're looking at. There are also other agent frameworks built on top of the AI SDK, I think, that take care of some of this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something that's going to be more focused. As I said, it's like you're focusing much on this like front end UI heavy part. I guess like multimodality will be one of the parts that's going to be important for that as well. So maybe just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would like to understand what you mean exactly by multimodality, because there are two variants, right? So one is like, hey, you send in images, you send in audio, you get like audio snippets or images out that we support. However, there's this real-time streaming part that you saw earlier, right? And so far we haven't looked at that, because in order to do that well, you need technologies like WebRTC and so forth, and then it gets a little bit more involved. And so we don't want to do a half-baked solution that would later on lead to interrupted chats and stuff like that. Mm. Right.
No basic point of the other one.
Yeah. And also we added transcription, and we added speech generation. Right now, non-streaming, but we may at some point look at streaming there again. So you could build something like that, but it will still involve a lot more like work from your end to get it ready. Oh, that's actually an interesting question. So we've played with this idea for years, and again, like our team is small, so we don't have the capacity to do it. But I've seen two projects recently that do it. So two open source projects implement a similar API to the AI SDK. One is calls itself Python AI SDK, and it came out like actually last week or this week. And it has the same API for Python, and then integrates into the UI parts. Now, one of the benefits of TypeScript end-to-end is that you define your types, and you have same types on server and client, especially for your chats, for your tools, for your data parts. And so with Python, obviously, you would need to specify it in Python and then in TypeScript. But yeah, those projects exist now. They're part of the community. Yeah, I mean they have all the like more hardcore ML stuff, right? The training your own models and all of that. Python is way stronger there. For building AI applications, I'm actually not sure. I think you build the AI applications in the language that you're using anyways, right? Doesn't matter if it's like Golang or Java or TypeScript or Python. I don't see the point of like changing the language specifically for that, right? But yeah, there's more gravity in kind of like the deep learning and machine learning infrastructure and all that. Hmm. Yeah, I think only if you want to train your own models. Honestly, like a lot of people said that, surprisingly, with the AI SDK, TypeScript is suddenly ahead, uh, because you can build those integrated end-to-end applications easier, right? Despite the advantage that Python used to have.
And maybe share a bit. I mean, we have our user base is pretty like broad across different languages, where initial like number of basically projects is largest on Python. So just like distinct users. However, like traffic is pretty nicely split between JavaScript and Python. And then large organizations are usually in their Go Java stack, where as applications get simpler, because in the end it's just like if you have structured output, since like functions and tools are more reliable, then you need less of this kind of like output parsing when beginning, for example, LangChain was really good at. Like if you need less of the output parsing, but the model does more on the API or within the model SDK already, then basically beyond that, it's just like you do your regular control flow. So it works well in whatever stack you feel comfortable in. So we rather get that, for example, streaming out of Python at large scale can be more frustrating than, for example, in JavaScript. But it really depends on the application team. Usually people just stick with their stack, or they switch to Python because they feel like they can be faster on demos because there are so many examples available in Python. Yeah.
Hmm. It, yeah, I mean, SSE is very easy to debug and understand, right? So they actually had two answers to that. One is SSE is easy to debug and understand, and we wanted to make it the default because also the providers themselves, they stream SSE. People are familiar with it, right? You can open your Chrome tab, see what comes in, and then if you want to manipulate those streams yourself, it's just JSON at the end, right? So we wanted to make that as easy as possible. Now, if you want to optimize the transport, you can swap that out. So in AI SDK 5, we made the transport, so the communication between the front end and the server swappable, right? So if you feel you can like go for a protobufs or whatever is optimized, right? I don't necessarily feel you have to. I don't think it'll make a big difference, but maybe it does for some applications, and then you can do that.
Nice. Let's maybe do like 2-3 more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe there in the back with the green t-shirt.
I mean, I have not even played with it yet. So I know there was some access, but I haven't looked at it. I don't look at models much anymore. For me, it's like I look at their capabilities and how to implement them, but I don't use them as much, surprisingly. So yeah. Oh, I wasn't even on the teams that had this.
Like Lars is building all of Vercel's products himself. Nice. There in the back with the like colorful.
Yeah, I mean, AI SDK 5 is a little bit of as a small step back in that regard for a reason. So before we had like two modes for structured outputs. One is tool calling, one is regular structured outputs. We see more and more providers go to the regular structured outputs direction, and you can emulate it with tool calling. We also saw that there was a need for simplicity. So we simplified that part. And now in the coming weeks, we'll probably catch up and implement some of that. There's also an interesting aspect in that JSON may not always be the right thing. So actually, a lot of people, when you do more complex things, you often talk about, hey, we want to have XML outputs and then parse those because, hey, the LLMs give you better results, or even plain text. It is a little bit in this direction of what the OpenAI announcement was about tool calling. So AI SDK has middlewares where you can do some of that, and they can also be community developed. So considerations are, for example, looking at middlewares that can enable like certain models to do that with XML or something. But it would, in a lot of ways, also depend on the developers, right? We want to give developers the control. So you need to be the one to decide, okay, for this model, maybe I should be trying out an XML middleware, put it together the right way, and so on and so forth. No, I meant the middleware would be abstract, right? And then the developer has to make the decision, because we want to avoid that to over optimize for specific model capabilities, right? If a model is really bad at it, at say producing JSON, then I don't think the AI SDK should be the one fixing it, because you get in this area where you kind of hot patch models in a way that, like, capabilities they don't have, and that is just not a good place to be in, right? So the developers sometimes need that, and then they can like use middlewares or have their own hacks. That's more the direction we're taking there. And if you need a better model, choose a better model. There are great models, as we've seen.
Nice. Let's maybe do 2 more. There's something, yeah, in the back, black t-shirt.
Oh, wow. No, I mean, we're maintaining all those providers. Like, for example, Vertex and OpenAI, and we have to because Gateway also uses them. So you can be sure that we make sure that the providers are really good, right? And so there are a bunch of core providers. Google is among them, where we implement and fix as much as we can. Now, we're a very small team, so there's always like a ton of features that are yet to be implemented. But those are the providers we care about. Right. Oh, there are requests, and probably we will. The question is, what's the relative priority as with everything, right? And so we'll probably get to it. I can't tell you when and how.
Nice. Let's do one final question before we close down. Yeah, go ahead. You were the only one raising your hand.
I mean, that's a very interesting question. I think there's a lot of space for next generation of like software development frameworks and so forth that are AI native. If that happens, I mean, this will happen to every library, right? So we probably, yeah, it could happen, it could not happen. It's really hard to predict 5 years from now. I mean, if you go 5 years back and predict today, you'll probably not have the prediction that we ended up at, right? So it's a possibility, but we are much more focused on the short term.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. I can very much recommend to follow Lars on X because he sometimes posts about like his latest thoughts on where to take the Vercel AI SDK abstractions. So I think, especially with version 5, you've done this a couple of times where basically you could have seen basically his whiteboards of, oh, this is like what I'm thinking about, what do you think? So there were some kind of like interesting debates online. Also, we'll be hosting these kinds of sessions more regularly now because there are like many interesting people here in Berlin, and we feel like many of them are not visible in any way, or there are not that many kind of like places where you can listen to them. And also a quick plug at the end for us, we are hiring here also for Langfuse in case you find the space extremely interesting next to Vercel, where you could work remotely on something like the Vercel AI SDK. Basically, we built out of Berlin. So if you're ever interested, feel free to ping us, and we'd love to chat. We still have the space for like another like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So feel free to stick around, grab a drink, chat with each other, or approach Lars with any questions. And thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.